Hi, welcome. So great to see you today. I'm Maureen Dwyer. I'm the Executive Director of Sitar Arts Center. And I'm just really pleased that you all have chosen to join us for this essential conversation. I feel lucky to be in this room right now because it is a room with smart people who are deeply committed to creating a more equitable and a more promising world for our youth. So today, my hope for you is that you can meet someone new who could perhaps support you in your work, gain new perspective, and also share your own, and collectively, we can strengthen our efforts. Here at Sitar, we build a creative community of belonging with and for DC youth. From early childhood through young adulthood, youth can explore and develop their interests and gifts in visual, media, and performing arts. And our mission is specifically to remove any financial or cultural barriers to arts education and creative career training. 80% of our students come from households with income that is 60% or less of median income. And most of those families are at 30% of median income. So as most of you know, arts education is expensive, so we want to ensure that every young person has their opportunity. In 2025, we celebrated Sitar Arts Center's 25th anniversary, and I truly believe that our mission is more urgent now than ever. The vibrancy of Sitar's community is largely due to the countries and the cultures our families come from. And yet, it is an especially vulnerable time for our families. How many times do our young people need to hear that they don't belong? At Sitar, youth deeply belong, and they are known, and here they can process this complex time through loving connection with their peers and adults, and through artistic expression. In 2022, Sitar began a 5-year strategic plan that reflects the decades of youth growing up at Sitar. Through input from high school students at the time and from a lot of alums, we heard repeated themes around the challenges of work, of pursuing a 4-year college degree, especially when you're overcoming financial barriers. Still, these young people are dreaming big, and many of them want to pursue careers in the arts and creative industries. So in response, Sitar has developed multiple youth leadership programs and 2 paid internship programs each year that in 25 employed 100 teens and young adults, introducing them to pathways in creative careers, as well as just the transferable skills to work anywhere. But still, we have a long way to go. We've had some hits, we've had some misses. It's a complex issue, and we're wrangling with it. As we do, time and again, we have turned to Kathleen deLaski for guidance. Kathleen founded the Education Design Lab in 2013 to reimagine higher education, to make it a means to effectively prepare students for the workforce. Her thinking is both expansive and practical. And she also understands the power of the arts in education and in humanity. Kathleen's Family Foundation has supported Sitar for almost all of her 25 years. Thank you, Kathleen. Now, as you know, Kathleen has literally written the book about the challenges and solutions for career pathways. And I'm incredibly grateful that she is here to share more today. I am equally delighted that Sitar's wonderful board vice president, Jaya Saxena, is here to moderate this discussion with her signature insight. Jaya is a lawyer, she is an inclusion strategist, and she brings an exceptional lens to any board conversation or decision we make. She is also a sought-after speaker at conferences and on podcasts, and probably the most avid reader I know. She regularly hosts book talks with fascinating authors like the one we're having today. So at this point, I will hand over the mic to these 2 brilliant minds, Please join me in welcoming Kathleen deLaski and Jaya Saxena to the stage.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear us? Can you hear me? Yes. Wonderful. It is so nice to see all of you. Thank you so much for being with us, for taking the time to join us in this conversation. And I am so delighted to have this opportunity to be in conversation with you, Kathleen.
Well, thank you so much.
So we have a lot to discuss. We have a lot to chat about, and we will make sure that there is time at the end for questions, reactions, reflections. I want to dive right in.
Okay.
So this is a fascinating title of your book.
Look at all the stickies that you have.
I know, I am an avid reader, so yes. Who needs college anymore? And certainly when I saw that, I thought, wow, what a provocative title of this book that you've written. So I'm going to start by asking you what led you to write this book. And how did you come up with this title?
Yes, well, some days I regret the title because I have I really wrote the book for two audiences. One is really higher ed and kind of the folks that the lab that Maureen described, the Education Design Lab, has worked with about 1,200 colleges through the last decade and a bit. And I really wanted to celebrate the kind of entrepreneurs or the intrapreneurs who are trying to change this sort of like steadfastness about college has to just be a 4-year degree. Because 60% of Americans do not have a 4-year degree, and yet they're made to feel less than. So talk about inclusion. If colleges could think beyond the degree and have more sort of products or services than just the 4-year degree, they could serve so many more people. So one of the audiences I wrote the book for was higher ed, stalwarts, if you will, to kind of push them to change. And some days, the reason that I said some days I wish I had maybe used a softer title is because just because of the title, some of those groups didn't want to put me on the podium. Others did. It was sort of like I realized over time it was kind of like the Harry Potter sorting hat, where depending on how you think about it, you either wanted to have the discussion because there are many college groups that are really gung-ho about innovation and changing the perception and the access. And then there are other groups that are like, particularly this past year with all that's been going on, with the Trump administration, it's like circle the wagons, like make the case for traditional higher ed. So you have those two fights going on. So one group I wrote the book for is obviously colleges, looking at colleges, but the other group is families, right? And I take a human-centered design approach, which means, as does the organization, which means that you look, when you're researching an issue, you look at the needs of the humans involved that are not being served. And as I just said, there's lots of that going on in higher education. And so I have a chapter, that's really about, families and learners and what they're facing. And, Maureen hinted at this. One of the issues they're facing is that college is kind of set up as a binary situation, like it's college or bust. And there are multiple pathways to success, and we're only highlighting one of them. And so that's the other reason I wrote the book.
That's fantastic, and we'll talk about this notion of redefining college and reframing what that means. And you did raise, there are quite a few sobering statistics in the book, if you haven't yet read it. One, I think you mentioned around 56% of folks who did this particular survey did not believe college is worth the cost. So that's more than half of the folks in that particular survey. There's another data point that I thought was fascinating, which is of all students who start college, 40 to 50% fail to earn their degree. So there are a lot of sobering statistics that really prompt us to think more about how can college be one of potentially several pathways, which we'll talk about. I'm also curious, and we had a chance to talk about this a little earlier, your own personal, there was a professional motivation for writing this book, obviously, but there was also a personal motivation.
Right.
Would you share with us a little bit more about the personal?
Yeah, sure. I probably really came from my two daughters who are now in their early 30s, but were going through the gauntlet of K-12 and high school in the aughts, the 2000 aughts, and that was really the zenith and the height of the College for All movement. And we raised my parents both are from DC, city. We raised our family in Northern Virginia. Wow, and it's so talk about binary, right? Like it's college or bust. And like the parents just expect you to go to college. And I had, two kids for whom the system, it wasn't working for either of them, really. I mean, one was trying to take an arts route, but also trying to, felt so compelled to keep college as the, backup plan, that it made her ill. She spent all of high school being, really in an unhealthy state, mentally and physically. It had physical ramifications. And so watching her go through that was painful, because she kept feeling, if I try to make it in ballet, that was her thing, I won't go to college and I'll be thought less of by everybody. And so she tried to hold these two things. It was horrible to be her parent during that time. I mean, she's today a successful ballerina, but that only works for I was telling you, 50 people a year in the country. So, I mean, that's such a long shot, but it's happened to work for her.
Great, yeah.
But during COVID, when she lost her job, she also found a pathway of a short-term boot camp, to learn skills in digital marketing, and actually got hired through a 2-month boot camp. And I was like, wow, I mean, she had a lot of, grit and personal skills that the professor in the course actually hired her for his marketing firm. So it made me realize, wow, okay, she's an adult. She was 20, late 20s at this point, and she can, career switch without going back. She thought, I would have to go back and get a 4-year degree in order to get a job. And that's just it's not true in every field. It's true in some fields. If you want to be a doctor, maybe a lawyer, right? But it's not true in every field. So that's one kid. The other kid, wow, she struggled, all the way through. Neurodivergent, undiagnosed, because it was the aughts. We didn't know, really smart, but struggling, and oppositional, and kicked out of several schools. It was just a mess the whole time through. A lot of stress for the family that even to this day, we all talk about and have, a little bit of PTSD about. She eventually, finally after 3 high schools, graduated with a 1-point GPA, went to community college, eventually, tried to get a job, and then all my friends are in college, I need to go to college, went to community college and ended up, gradually getting a degree, which then she couldn't use because it was neuroscience,
right.
And nobody had told her that, you actually have to get a PhD to get a job in neuroscience. So she felt really, kind of let down. Went to work in a bike shop, and then ended up apprenticing to be an astrologer later, in her 20s. So, when I see everyone I interviewed 150 folks for the book, the people who didn't make it through college, or even so many who did, they're in their 20s, it was kind of like this quest to try to get on a path. And whether they went to college or not, yes, sure, people who went to college were helped in that quest. But the people who weren't, they just didn't have very many, or didn't do college, there were so few options for them. And I highlight Year Up, which is one of the options.
Yeah.
And it's fantastic. It's kind of like sitar for 20-somethings, and helps you get into the workforce without a degree. And we need more programs like that. We need more apprenticeships.
Right,
And we need more.
talk about it in the book as well.
We need more boot camps, that are set up like the one my daughter did. So that's a long-winded tale of my 2 daughters. But I should say the one that struggled to go through college did
Sitar?
was an intern.
Yes, you said that.
Yeah, I did say that. Yeah.
Yeah, you did that. That's lovely. And here you are, now
Yeah.
back in the space. One of the things that you do talk quite a bit about boot camps and internships and other alternative pathways, as you described. I do, and you also mentioned just now the interviews you did, which I believe some of them were through Reddit.
Yeah,
I heard.
we found people through Reddit.
Which I didn't realize that you could find data, get data through Reddit.
Reddit's really interesting research tool, actually.
Yeah. So I want to talk a bit about this concept of new majority learners.
Mhm.
And I don't know if everyone's familiar with that term. Basically, the way you define them are students from non-college educated families for whom college was never truly designed. And you did 150 interviews for this book, some of whom were with new majority learners or their families.
Mhm.
So I think it would be really great to hear what were some of the themes that you consistently heard from these learners about what they want and need, but are not getting
Right.
from the more traditional four-year college institutions.
Right, that's great. So I dedicated the book to new majority learners, which is a phrase that we use at the lab to describe basically anyone for whom college was not originally designed. And actually it's more than just first in the it's also anyone from a low-income family. We also would put people of color who for many years were locked out of higher education, many centuries. We would put folks who are over age, if you will, so non-traditional learners, veterans, single parents. Anyone for whom it's not actually set up. It's basically set up for the student who is taken to school by the, in the family SUV by their parents and, set up in the dorm, right? That's the mindset. And so everyone else is trying to kind of like make it work. And that's why we have the statistics of the 40 to 50 percent not finishing, and it is 50% for new majority learners don't get through the gauntlet, which is just horrendous, So what are they not getting? They're not getting, flexibility, which actually COVID has helped a little bit with that because at least we have more online, so you can do hybrid now. So that's that's one thing. Flexibility. Another is affordability. That's probably the biggest. And interestingly, you might not feel it with prices going up of everything, but the price of college is actually coming down a little bit because colleges are waking up to a lot of this. They're holding, even expensive colleges are figuring out how to hold prices down. They're doing a lot more discounting. You might not see it on the sticker price, but they're doing a lot more tuition discounting. And scholarships. And states are coming in, something like 30 states have some kind of free college program. It's usually community college. Sometimes it's limited to lower income families. But we are seeing that where you've got efforts to make college more affordable. And that's, to me, that is the number one, barrier, right? And then another barrier is relevance, right? Where the idea that you go to a four-year degree, particularly if you're, let's say you were my daughter, you're 28 years old, you don't have 4 years, you don't want to spend 4 years. You want something that, everyone wants, to have their, the magic bullet delivered quickly. And I think we're all programmed now to expect, delivery of the value proposition quickly, right?
Yeah.
And so, we've created these things called micro pathways, which are kind of meant for the non-traditional college student, where you're really going for kind of like a boot camp, but that colleges are offering it. And we're doing it with community colleges, but a couple of the 4 years are starting to call us and say, oh, maybe we need this too. And it's like a 6-month program designed with the local employers to deliver job-ready people for the particular, we're doing it in everything from tech to semiconductors, AI. We're doing some with Amazon or AWS in this area with Northern Virginia Community College. that's really taking off as an idea.
Well, and these folks are leaving with the specific skills or competencies
Yes.
that are then required for the job.
For the job, yeah.
So in chapter 5 of the book, you ask, is college for all dead?
Mm-hmm.
And you note that I thought this was particularly interesting. You note that the shift isn't being driven by school leaders as much as by families themselves, which I think was counterintuitive for me. So let's talk about this notion of redefining college. You talk in your book, you say that one way to redefine it as college is as any post-high school path that sets their learner up for sustainable wage and opens up their eyes to possibilities. So this notion of reframing college as a pathway and not a destination, which I think many of myself included. I mean, it was a destination. You do this, and then you
get there, and then you expect that the college will deliver you at the doorstep of your first job, right?
Exactly.
And that it doesn't happen that way.
So how can we think about what is replacing or what's additive to the conversation when it comes to college as one of several pathways? And how can we help young people and families look at this as something that is empowering, not as I couldn't get to college and therefore I went to this, but that it's empowering to think of it as one of several possible pathways.
Right. Well, I think the arts is a great example that needs to be reimagined by how colleges think about the arts. I mean, you know, one of the reasons some of the students I imagine at Sitar are kind of struggling with their plans after high school is that it's like if you go to an arts school, particularly one that might be, you know, either visual arts or performing arts or anything, you often have to go to a conservatory or you have to go to an expensive private school, and you get there with no promise that anything's coming out of that on the other side, and it's 4 years. Well, why does it have to be a BFA? You know, why can't it be a 1-year residency where you can, you know, sort of pay as you go, you know, and why aren't colleges thinking about that, of offering shorter versions of particularly the, you know, the college experience piece that yes, everyone should have, that's wonderful, but why does it have to be 4 years? It has to be 4 years because that's the economic model that you know, colleges aren't paid for something that's not a degree by the tuition, you know, by the federal financial aid system. We can maybe talk about, there's a breakthrough on that that just got passed in the Big Beautiful Bill. It was like one of the, I think, good things that happened in the Big Beautiful Bill last summer, where now colleges can get paid for shorter term programs, but that's brand new, and there's so many, like, you know, loopholes and caveats that we don't know how much that's going to really help the design of pathways. But, you know, so just to frame or just to help you imagine what it could be, it could be that there's a degree, you know, there's a 2-year degree, there's a 4-year degree, those are options for students. If, you know, if there's the money or the requirement of a, you know, of licensing that a doctor or a CPA, you know, needs the degree, fine. But then there should be other shorter versions like residencies or even like the human skills, you know, like if you want to just get the gen ed or the, you know, the general education, the liberal arts, but let's have a 1-year version of that for students who can't afford a 4-year version. Why should they be excluded from having that college experience? You know, so those are some of the things, you know, or also apprenticeships. Why are colleges taking the lead to make apprenticeships happen with employers and framing that and doing the required coursework? It should be something that colleges do because nobody else is really doing it, you know, in this country.
Yeah. So one of the things, when I saw the title of the book, and I wonder if some other folks assumed that you would just answer the question. Like, you know, when you say who needs college anymore, it was either going to be a yes or a no. And I mean, spoiler alert, it depends, which we'll get to.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I think a lot of folks, particularly families and parents and young people themselves face is, am I making the right choice? And one of the things that I really appreciate about the book is that it does challenge the idea that there's just one moment or one decision that's going to shape or define a young person's future, which you are helping us to dismantle that notion. Let's talk a little bit more about experience, because you talk about this, I love the way you say this in the book, experience is the new degree. And one of the things you talk about, and you write extensively about, is employers who are increasingly open to hiring young people without degrees when they bring the skills, experiences, and creative problem solving. So in your conversations with employers, what do you see is really changing in how employers think about talent?
Yeah. Well, part of this is brought on by the change in the hiring system and the, almost like the plumbing or the background of the way that job application system works. Even in the past maybe like 10 years, employers really moved to a automated system where when they're looking for somebody, let's say in tech, it's all based on algorithms and search terms. So we train the students or the graduates to put the skills in that you have. And that's what's going to get you through the automated, process to land on the desk of the actual person who might be, deciding to interview you. But so skills-based hiring is the term that I talk about it in the book, that has been gaining ground over the past 10 years. And we haven't talked about AI yet, but
this is going to be the perfect segue.
But AI is really like accelerating that movement, so that what now is important is what are those little terms? I mean, AI, unlike the algorithms of yesteryear, can actually like digest your whole resume and take into account, oh, you were in shows at Sitar and you play the flute and you got to first flute. Like it can ingest more, make more inferences than those, very rudimentary search terms. But it's still, the system is choked right now. And so I think we're on the cusp of needing to really overhaul not just college, but also the hiring system. Right now, experience is the thing that sets you apart. And skills. I mean, if you can, like in your resume, put that, I know how to build an AI app, use AI and I use this app to build it, that will get noticed, yes. Right? But experience in job, like I worked for 2 years doing X, seems to be more important now than I have a degree. A degree is a blunt instrument to an employer. They're like, okay, that tells me something. It tells me that the student has made it through this pretty difficult gauntlet. That's the main thing it tells the the employer. And then if you're a computer science major, if you're a specific major, you might have certain skills, but they really want to know that you have experience in context of the skills that they want to hire you for.
And we'll talk about this in a little bit in terms of who college might make sense for and maybe for not. But before we get to that, I do want to touch on the topic of AI. And I think in many conversations, we hear that there is a fear that AI is going to lead to job loss, which is true to some. We were talking about that a little bit when it comes to entry-level roles and what the impact AI might have on those. But there's also this opportunity to think about how AI can expand people's sense of what roles they're qualified for. And so how do you see AI? We've talked about this a little bit, but I'm trying to think about how else might AI reshape the value of degrees versus skills? I did, for example, I did a test of this myself where I went into LinkedIn and I just put in my resume for a job and it spit out the exact words that I should be using that are not there.
Right.
So tell us more about how AI, you think, will be reshaping the value of degree versus skills, and how can we help young people be future ready?
Right. Well, I want to work on that very question. How can we help young people be future ready? So I decided to teach a class this semester. I teach at George Mason, and my class this semester is called How to Get Hired in the Age of AI. And we met last night, 3 hours. It's a once a week class. We meet in person, and yeah, I mean, they're super worried. I mean, they're reading all the headlines. They watched all the Super Bowl ads the other night, and that they think that their degree isn't going to mean enough. I think, the line that I used with them on the first night to kind of calm them down was, like, AI isn't going to take your job. The person who's going to get hired is the person who knows how to use AI, better than the guy behind them, right? And so it's really about leveraging the technology. So we are, I'm throwing them into the deep end. Next week they're meeting without me, and they have to build a bot or an app. And I went and did. I'm not a technical person. I used AI I taught myself vibe coding a few weeks ago, and I went and built an app, and it turned out pretty well. I was like, I told them, so I walked them through what I did, and then I'm sending them on. So that, the point here of telling this story is that what we need to help young people do is be curious and brave enough to stay ahead of the AI evolution, which is, coming fast and strong.
It's here.
It's here, right?
It's here.
And when I met a student, as some of your students might be, the other night at an event, and she said, I'm majoring in graphic design. And I was like, oh, because that's like one of the fields that's like most at risk, apparently, And I was like, oh, well, what are you doing about AI? And she just looked at me blankly and kind of said, like, well, I don't really trust it. And I was like, okay, great, good luck.
Yeah, there is a sense of fear and discomfort in embracing it as a technology that we can actually leverage to our advantage.
Absolutely.
So I'm presuming that there are quite a few folks in our audience here from different backgrounds, educators, nonprofit leaders, organizations in the community, families, parents, and you suggest that higher education is morphing into a broader training ecosystem. What are your thoughts on how organizations like Sitar can play in this transition, especially for students who walk through the doors here, who, as you talk about, have generally been historically excluded from traditional pathways? So what would be the role of an organization like Sitar, or even other nonprofits?
Yeah, that's a great question, because in the last chapter where I talk about, what's the future look like, where are we going by mid-century, I describe three categories, of which I think Sitar is very importantly placed in the first category. The category at one end of the spectrum is traditional higher education, right? Which, like, elite colleges, not going to change. And, in fact, more people are trying to get into them, right? In the middle is what I call kind of the edu training middle, which there are a lot of platforms, and you're going to see Amazon in the mix. Everyone's going to be offering training, including a lot of the more progressive colleges. I talk about various online colleges that are growing like mad, and those play an important role. Some of them will have in person, some of them, but they are really focused on training people agilely throughout their lives for jobs, and that's an important middle sector, this edu training sector, I call it. And then you have what's going to be the smallest group, but potentially, if you care about inclusion, the most important group, which I call the It Takes a Village sector. And these are the people that are, for the folks who either can't get into the gauntlet, are afraid of the gauntlet, can't afford the gauntlet. We need the, let's call it the underpinning, or I don't want to call it a safety net, because it might start out that way, but it really is empowering. And this is the web of nonprofits. I talk about Year Up, I talk about Spark the Journey. I talk about, I don't know if I mentioned sitar in the book, because it wasn't part of the storytelling I was doing, but I certainly had it in my mind as an example of a community that helps people come in and really kind of find their way in an exploratory fashion and supports them to launch. And that has to be stronger than ever. And I will, finish this thought by saying, I say that it's really an exciting moment for intermediaries, because intermediaries to make a lot of that work, a lot of that whole system work, become more important, because we're not in our silos anymore. We're kind of taking down the silos of what is K-12, what is higher ed, what is work. My recommendation is that those have to blend together more, and it takes intermediaries to make that happen.
One thing I want to talk about that you just prompted me to think about is this whole concept of belonging and how that is such a critical pillar here at Sitar in terms of the values. And one of the things that comes out of traditional colleges oftentimes is that sense of that network and that community and that sense of belonging for some students. How do you see that fitting into these other pathways? Are you confident that they can also foster that similar sense of belonging that a traditional college institution might do?
You mean like the big middle?
Yes.
No, I mean, this is one reason I'm really pro on apprenticeships, and this idea that you could, if you either have a job, that you have a community around your job and you're getting classwork training, or that it comes the other direction where you're in a school and you're going to get work-based experiences in order to gain this experience that is becoming so essential. I think those opportunities create community in ways that taking a couple of online classes just can't. We have to preserve community. It is, particularly in the age of AI, right? It becomes more and more essential as a role. I mean, I almost wish that colleges could get paid the federal tuition dollars just to create, cohorts and community. That would, you'd see, it really is about how the funding model works as to what colleges feel they can do.
So I have a big question. We're gonna, perhaps, this might be the last question before we open this up for conversation. The big $1 million question.
Yes, I know what's coming.
I'm gonna throw a curveball.
Just
kidding. Who does still need college? So I found this to be so fascinating towards the end of the book, and you have these different personas that you outline of who may not need college and who might still need college. And one that really resonated with me was you talk about women. And you talk about how for many women, there's a sense of legitimacy by having a college degree. I can certainly say that even for law school. It gives me some legitimacy as a woman. So you go through these different personas of who the types of individuals where college may not be the right decision, and then those students who you would recommend it for. And so that it would be great to hear more of, who does still need it. And how do we help young people make informed decisions that are aligned with who they are and what's important to them?
Great. Well, thank you. That's a great framing. I won't go through all the categories because that would maybe take too long. It's chapter 6 of the book.
And we could have a diagram or a chart.
Right, exactly. But I'll just say that I want to make sure this audience doesn't take away that I think that an 18-year-old coming out of high school should not look to college as a first choice. I do actually, because I think that the growth that happens in a four-year degree at that age versus the options that they have, I would always recommend a college degree to the traditional student. I mean, and the new majority learner, if circumstances permit, But so many times they don't permit, and so like one of the young women I interviewed from, she didn't get into year up till she was 28, but when she was 18, she said, well, my mom had 2 kids, she could pay, she said the first one gets to go to college, the second one doesn't. And she was out of luck, so she eventually went into the military, but it like wasn't for her, so she just bounced around, until she found Europe. But, so I would always first recommend, a college path, if it will work, because we haven't greased the skids for these other paths very well yet. The exceptions, I think, would be right now, if you are a DIY, kind of person, and you wanna, and you don't wanna be in the group, you're not looking for community, or you're afraid of community, or for, whatever reason, that, I have the motivated DIYer is one of my categories, and I interview one young man, who's just was able to basically YouTube was his college, and he taught himself everything. He was like a fix-it. He had these, and he's from Northern Virginia. He had these certificates, industry certificates that he'd earned in high school, just as electives in data security, because he just happened to take these courses, found it interesting. He was a bit of a tinker, and he got hired. He was going to go to community college, but he put his resume on LinkedIn or on Indeed, and got a call from AWS to work in their, the data security centers out there in Northern Virginia, and worked his way up. Anyway, super happy. 23 years old now. Making 6 figures as a software engineer.
Right,
yeah, Patrick is his name. And, so he's a motivated DIYer, and he had a little bit of FOMO about his friends went to college, and, but he said when they get out of college, he said, I was so ahead of them and still am,
Yeah.
So that, that's one case of the sort of person, he doesn't have regrets, at all. Another case I gave you was the career switcher, and this tends to be the older person. It's do I need to go back and do the 4-year degree? They think they do. My daughter's boyfriend is 50. He never went to college. He thinks, he wants to go now because he wants to switch careers. I'm like, you don't have to go back and get. He said, oh, well, how else? Don't you have to have a degree to get a job? So that's another example. Then we have the kind of students who are going into apprenticeships, and those are people who want to work with their hands. It doesn't have to be a trade. We're starting to get apprenticeships in financial services and in tech. I profile somebody who went into insurance as out of high school, did very well in an apprenticeship, but those are few and far between right now, right? So those are some of the examples of folks who could get away without doing it, but I would recommend to any 18-year-old, unless there's a huge issues of affordability or caring for loved ones or single mom situations, then to look for shorter term pathways.
So in other words, just to double down on this one point, the folks you would recommend it for, people where the financial ability is there.
Yep.
Where there's licensure requirements. So you talked about people with JDs or MDs.
Yeah, certain fields, if you want to be a nurse or a doctor or a teacher, you have to have that piece of paper. That's going to change. It really, it's starting to change already, which we don't have time to get into. But for right now,
yeah,
yes.
And then people who you mentioned are the category of folks who feel like they need it to be legitimate.
Yep. Right.
So I just to get to those who the factors or circumstances that would lead someone
and low income folks whose parents particularly might see it, and this might be the case for some Satar families, right? See it as a class transport mechanism.
Right.
That's really important, and the data show that works.
Yeah. Well, I think we are at time. We want to make sure there's plenty of time for any questions or reflections. You've certainly given me a lot to think about. I also have 2 daughters, 8 and 12, so I'm trying to think about how can I be future ready. So let's hear from all of you. We'd love to open this up, and I think there are mics as well, if I'm not mistaken. Perfect, Sarah.
Hello everyone, my name is Sarah Gibson. I'm a board member here as well, so thank you all for being here. And hello? Oh yes. And I'm also a small business owner.
help me, and it is an internal discussion, especially with some of my staff, to make space for whether it's internships or some of that. Give me the talking points for either clients, or I'm like, this is why we are doing this type of program, for my team to say, like, this is why we're going to make space for this. And maybe where you've seen that be successful, you talk with the big employers and the community, but there's a whole bunch of us over here and really interested in this, especially the experience piece.
Yeah, well, I have a particular group that is trying to do this in DC to link you with, which is called CityWorks. In fact, you may have heard of them. It's run by the former deputy mayor of DC, Jenny Niles, who also was the founder of E.L. Haynes Charter School Network here in DC. And she's trying to work this specifically with DC area employers. So I think you should definitely, I can connect you, because she's always looking for employers, because it is hard to convince employers to do the kind of initial setup work, because they don't see the ROI. And my fear is they might see it less with AI, because your internal employees can do some of that, the kinds of things you would have an intern do, you can now ask AI to do, depending on your business. If you're a physical business, no. But if you're, anything to do with research or comms or, I don't know, finance, a lot of that stuff can be done by AI now. And so, but if maybe you'd hire an intern that knows how to use all those things, that's what UVA is actually running an experiment with small business people, and we could talk about that. And that might be something for Sitar to think about too. If your interns are the people that actually have learned how to use this stuff in this kind of interstitial period where businesses don't know how to do it, that could be an interesting, idea.
Thank you.
It's working. I am a former Sitar Arts student, but I'm also a podcast host. I just pressed one big thing. I just wanted to know how, if you have any tips about expanding my podcast.
Oh.
What's the name of your podcast?
Inclusion Revolution Radio.
Oh yes, I talked to your mom in the lobby, so I know all about you.
Inclusion Revolution Radio. Check it out.
I love that. I love that. How to expand your podcast? Yeah, well, I've been actually looking into this a lot myself as as somebody who's trying to, spread this message. And I do think AI in some ways helps, at least to do the research to figure out, what podcasts, like who are how to expand your audiences. So, I would certainly use AI as a research tool, either, Claude or ChatGPT, for example, or Gemini even in this case. The other thing is, if you're trying to create content, some of the AI, I'm kind of suspicious of some of the quality in terms of it being authentic enough of like myself using AI to generate content for me to help expand my message. But there are tools you could experiment with that could be kind of interesting to at least do some of the work for you. Yeah, and you're probably using AI, or maybe you're using AI already to edit your podcasts or things like that. I have podcaster friends who are saying, yeah, it's really helping them, save the work. So, to kind of tie these 2 points together, small business people or gig artists are, it's almost like, I heard somebody say, wow, as a startup person, I find that AI tools can be my CFO, my, chief communications officer. As long as I can learn how to, be the master controller, I can have a whole business where I'm the only human, and it really leverages it. But it probably takes us all a while to get there. But that's kind of exciting when you think about creatives needing, there's a lot of bad stuff happening for creatives, but when we think about how we can have support to be entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I would just add kudos first for having a
Yeah.
podcast. And also, I would say leverage, just adding the thoughts that come to mind, so making sure you're leveraging social media. I also think thinking about maybe a guest who has a high profile guest, if you have conversations with people. And then the other thing I'm hearing a lot about is how videos are getting a lot more traction. I don't know if yours is audio only, but showing your face and having the other person visually appear as well, those tend to get more engagement.
Yeah, yeah, LinkedIn is definitely favoring, you get
Video.
more reach if you use video.
Which I am not a fan of.
I'm not either. I'm not
But
doing it,
apparently
but-
that's what
yeah.
works.
Yeah.
Was there a question? There's a couple over here.
I'd like to speak on behalf of Novi, because you spoke on having a high-profile guest on her podcast. Novi's community is basically adults that experience disability. So I haven't read your book, but I do know that adults that experience disability, most of them don't go to college. Can you speak on maybe how to use pathways for that community? Because there are a bunch of folks who have skills, like Novi, who can actually get a career
Yeah,
or create a career, but outside of college, because of course most of them do not go.
yeah.
I didn't go. I didn't want to go.
Yeah.
No.
We were talking about that
Yeah.
earlier.
That's a
Yeah.
great point.
But maybe you could be one of the guests on her podcast
That's where this
I would love that. Yeah.
to really to speak to this community, because it's massive.
I would love that.
Yeah, definitely come out to see how I play. I do sports. But also-
Sports, like,
Yes,
I don't
I
do
play
sports.
basketball, volleyball, tennis, bocce ball, and flag football, and tennis. It was definitely good.
Yeah.
So I connect with definitely special, which is a good place to start, but also we can connect after this.
Right. Well, I do think that both apprenticeships and these short-term micro pathways I was describing are two types of learning paths that I think are well suited for both short-term and accommodation, and also sort of special qualities that like specialization, if you will.
We have a question over here.
Cool.
All right, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, first of all, thank you very Sitar for doing this, and thank you Kathleen for Education Design Lab. I don't know if you feel like I told you so, because you started that like 14 years ago.
Yes.
All right, you must feel incredible validation right now. I just want to say I run a global social learning network. You trade live learning and leadership instead of lives. Take kids back from TikTok and 8 hours a day on the phone.
Fantastic.
Your program and your collaboration, empathy, badges, communication skills badges were a key part of what we architected into our program.
Wow.
Do you feel that we need to fundamentally redesign K-12 and higher ed so that we stop damaging our kids and stop teaching them to compete and not collaborate?
Whoa. Wow.
You don't have to answer if you don't want to.
That's boiling the whole ocean, yeah. Yeah, so, well, thank you for your comments too, and I don't know what to say. I mean, I was in the K-12 field for a while, in college access field, but I do not feel very qualified to speak about, what to do about K-12. I mean, one thing we didn't talk about, I mentioned in the book, that it might be interesting to you all, that I think could be a way into redesigning K-12, is this huge movement for students and parents wanting to take college classes while still in high school. It's the fastest growing form of enrollment in college is actually high school students taking college courses. 4 million students are doing it now. And what the lab is working on right now is how can we intentionalize the courses that they're taking so that those themselves could be the pathways that we're talking about, and obviate the need for, everyone to feel like they had to go to college, or it would be a way to work to increase your earnings power so that you could work while you were in college. And that's been really exciting work. We have a number of foundations that are funding us to expand that work around the country right now. And we're calling it early pathways and intentionalizing the sort of the 11th, 12th grade curriculum. And so that's, it's really where when you look at human-centered design and you ask, what are families telling us? Well, they're telling us that they're not happy with high school. If 4 million of them are trying to gain college and figure out where else can I go to learn? It's fascinating.
Well, and we talked about this earlier, just the competitiveness of it now. And I always think if I were applying to college right now, I probably wouldn't get into any that I got into.
It
Yeah.
is brutal,
Yeah.
what we are doing to kids and families.
It is brutal. I took, I say this in the introduction of the book, I did one of those AI where you put all your stuff in to see if you could get what college you could get into.
And we're all failable.
I
We'll
had-
get rejected.
It said that I would have a 3% chance of getting into the college I went to. Yeah.
There's another question, there's a couple. Okay, back there, yes.
Hi, I'm Bryce Jacobs. To your last point, I'm actually working on a project in Alexandria City Public Schools, looking at the youth employment landscape there.
Wonderful.
My question is about something you mentioned about greasing the skids of these pathways to get there. What would it take to get there to really do that? Was it higher ed first? Is it the pathways first? Is it groundswell of grassroots support for pathways?
Yeah.
How do we get there?
Yeah, I have a couple of ideas and would love to talk to you about how to do it around here. So the deLaski Family Foundation is funding City Year, that's right, not City Year.
City Works.
City Works.
Jenny's my neighbor.
Oh, Jenny's your neighbor, right, so, and we were trying to fund, the Northern Virginia Chamber of Commerce, to do, because what I believe is that this work will bubble up, it'll start locally, right? It's gotta start in markets. And so employers in a market, if we can get them to do two things, I think will kind of help grease the skids. One is apprenticeships across, many different types of jobs. And the second is these industry certifications, which they could offer to high school students. They exist in certain fields. They exist in medical fields, certain medical fields, and in tech. And construction, and that's about it. Right? So why can't we have credentials? Because if you have the credential, like Patrick, that guy I told you had the data security, that field has credentials that you can earn and get hired. We need those credentials in other fields, and it's hard to nationally do that, but we could locally do that. And there have been some, that one's harder than apprenticeships actually, but we need to do it.
Hi, thank you very much for shining a very bright light on this topic. It's so important in the age of AI. I'm actually reading your book as I'm walking. I'm on chapter 6. I love the way you talk about different pathways to the American dream and how we're going to accomplish this. Well, my question is about how do you get around the conundrum of the cost of the boot camp, the college, the education in general. You talk a little bit about the shared benefits and the cost. Should corporations that add developers paying for the cost? But in one social media post, it could be announced that you just spent $1,000, thousands of dollars in time developing these skills for a particular job, and you just learned in a social media post that artificial intelligence can now do that.
Yeah.
So how do you get around that conundrum?
That is a really tough conundrum. I think it's future casting to understand, like let's name a job that's going away, coding, right? That's a job that pretty much is going away. If I was teaching, and I have in my class some computer science majors who were planning to kind of do that as their first job, and now they're trying to pivot. That's why they're in my class, right? And I think what what I would say to those students or their parents is, we're still, you just have to stay ahead of the curve, and you can do that by educating yourself. In fact, I'm often asking ChatGPT, like, okay, where's this going? Like, what is the skill? What is the next skill? And it's actually pretty, it's pretty interesting. Like, I had a speaker last night who said, we were all talking about prompt engineering a year ago. That's like, what prompt do you put into the AI? Now the new skill set is context engineering, because it's like evolving, okay, well, that's not hard to learn what the next thing is. I mean, I think it's the agility that we have to teach them, that this situation is fluid, and we need the educators to be moving with them, and that's actually harder, I think, than getting the learners to be fluid, is getting, the programs and the things you can sign up for, the courses. It's harder for them to be fluid, but we're working on it. But it is a conundrum.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is LaTanya Ferris Robinson. I work for a performing arts nonprofit in Prince George's County, very much like the Sitar, and we have a workforce development program and apprenticeship program, and we've been working with the Department of Labor to place our students who complete the 22-week program in work. And so right now, there are a couple of different pathways that we want to add, one being related to AI, and the other in arts education, early arts education, because we do have an on-site out-of-school program during the school year and for summer, and so it would even be helpful to us to have students go through that 22-week program that is paid, and then come into work for us, and then ultimately enter into a school system because they've got experience and they've been trained. My question to you is, will you come to Joe's Movement Emporium? Will you talk to our team?
Yeah.
Will you talk to our students?
Sure.
I love that, thank you.
Yeah, no, I love that. I would love to. Yeah. And is it Department of Labor, Maryland Department of Labor? Okay, I was going to say, it didn't sound like something the U.S. Department of Labor. They will be up in Maryland.
Thank you so much for this conversation, for Sitar holding this conversation. Hi, Kathleen. Griselda Macias with New Futures. I think one of the, recently I did a piece with a colleague around short-term credentials, multiple pathways. There's a lot of terms being used, and one of the things that we continuously still read and hear about is the stigma around it. There's still a large number of young people who are hesitant or around going down that path.
Yeah.
I think there's more awareness in some of these paths, but still some work to do. How can nonprofits like Sitar, Spark, New Futures who are higher education adjacent, complement, supporting young people in these paths, help destigmatize this constant narrative that I think young people are still fearing? Yeah.
Well, do you think the narrative lessened when you bring, like, I've been to some of your dinners and seen your students speak, when they have a job and they come back and talk to the other folks, does that help? Because that's what we're seeing, is that success begets, status and support for the pathways.
We've seen some of that.
Some of that, yeah.
Yeah, but I think that it's interesting because when, I'm so sorry, I didn't catch your name, spoke about, competitive versus how can we create more collaborative.
Right.
We still see a lot, I think the stigma is competitiveness of wanting to, I have a bachelor degree versus a community college degree or certification. Yeah. There's still that stigma of feeling less than.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's part of the status, the legitimate, particularly if you've got parents, and particularly if you've got immigrant parents who worked hard to come to this country so that you could be a doctor or that you could have that degree. Interestingly, the college enrollment this year and last year is up, but it's not up. It's up mainly because of short-term credential enrollment and this dual enrollment, the high school enrollment. But degree enrollment is up among lower income, like the people who are not going to college right now, or the drop, is white, wealthier people. Which is, and I think what you're saying partly drives into that, because I feel like, you know, many populations, you know, maybe some of the ones you serve, I mean, college is the ticket, right? And you gotta get there. And whereas I feel like, you know, some wealthier families are more like, hey, you know, if you want to do a startup, or like, I have a couple of nephews who are, you know, want to be artists, right? And, you know, they're like, you know, trying that out, right? And they have a safety net, right? They can be in the parents' basement, right? And they're not getting as much pressure in certain communities from their parents. It's fascinating.
Okay, it's on. Hi. My name is Eamon Zerari. I'm actually the curriculum and training manager at Spark the Journey. So thank you for shouting us out. I'm looking forward to reading your book, but I really appreciate you mentioning just experience as the new degree. I also appreciate just all of us having the conversation about, you know, are young people considering pathways outside of college, and really just leaning into pursuing like credentials or certifications that have hard skills, right?
Yeah, exactly.
What would you say then to, one of the benefits I would say of going to college, right, is the community piece that you also mentioned, and the growth, and with that growth comes soft skills. So what would you say then for young people who do want to pursue a pathway outside of college? How can they find opportunities to strengthen or learn or practice soft skills?
Yeah, it's funny. I was just talking last week to the Year Up people about this, because they feel like they are now at a point where their brand, and I'm not like sibling them out above you guys, but they feel like because of their brand, you know, so they do like a 6-month technical skills and human skills, or, you know, soft skills training, and they feel like it's the human skills training that now, like, their brand is getting their students hired, and community colleges are starting to ask them to come and just do the soft skills training for their short-term students, which I think is fascinating. So, you know, we've got to build up the credentials, known credentials, or, you know, brands of organizations that deliver like highly trained soft skills, non-college graduates. And I think, yeah, we can get there, but this kind of community needs to be the, you know, you all need to, I would say, isolate it in a way that it's discreet enough that people know, you know, that they're getting something specific in these skills. Like, what are these skills? Like, even brand it as its own thing, you know, like the soft skills or the human skills. I mean, now I think everyone's wanting to use the word human skills. The human skills advantage, or, you know, something. Brand it.
Thank you.
I think we might be at time, although I don't know if you're sticking around a little bit.
Yeah,
but some of the
yeah.
questions.
Well, I hear there's food, right?
Burning last question.
Oh, a burning
Yeah.
last question. We cannot.
Burning last question.
Okay, this
We
will be
did
the.
have one person with a mic. Please. Okay.
Can you combine?
Well, if you can jump that. Hi, I'm Kelly Quinn, and I work I'm the executive director of a dance education and performance organization here in the city. So I hear your plight about your daughter.
Yes.
I'm curious, you spoke to one of the, in the question about who should go to college, and one of the responses was, it is a mechanism for class shift. And do you see a future where that changes?
Where it's not an opportunity for class shift, or where
it's not a significant,
Yeah.
I think, it's not just an opportunity. I think the thing that, at least I'm hearing, is it is the mechanism or the barometer by which an individual is at least perceived to be able to most directly shift their class. And do you see a future in these other pipelines as they're built, et cetera, where that can start to shift? Or is that going to be a hard nut to crack?
Yeah, I think the shift is not necessarily a shift as like, what else can we bring up to that level, as opposed to the degree, you know, not like we're flipping it. but that how can apprenticeship, and I talk in the book about like the young woman who was from an immigrant family who did the insurance apprenticeship instead of college, and her mom was like really skeptical because she wanted her daughter to get a degree, and she brought her mom to the office, and gradually as this kid ends up buying a house, it starts to dawn on her, and I think these kinds of things have to spread through the parent community, right, to get to the point where there's so more examples I think can help elevate these pathways to a less stigmatized position, but it's going to take a while. So, I wanted to say one thing before we break, that I have 4 copies of the book to give away, and then I also have these little cards that like with the QR code and stuff. If you do want to buy it, like you can buy it on Amazon. You can just Google my name if you want. But then I also have a Substack column that I've been doing for the last year, where I'm continuing to talk about new developments, and a lot of you are following these issues closely. So, I would love to have you in my Substack community. It's also called Who Needs College Anymore?
And as part of your website, right? Is that can be?
Oh yeah. You can also it's linked into my website as well. Yeah, but I'm really interested in these issues, and there's a lot of developments that have happened since the book came out almost a year ago. Yeah.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Kathleen.
Thank you.